I recently got an email sharing a video by Isaac of Daily Disciple responding to an atheist's objections to the idea of hell. Hopefully it will give you some ideas for when Christians try similar rationales, so here we go.
Deconstruction is one of the most hot-button issues in Christianity today. Whether it's ex-evangelical or deconstructionist, a lot of these people that are breaking down the foundations of their faith roam on to social media and share their new perspectives about Christianity, Jesus, and the Bible.
That's a reasonable summation of what happens, though roam on to social media seems like strange phrasing with possibly derogatory undertones. Kind of like they're wandering around thoughtlessly looking for a place to spew stuff? Or that they're some weird barbarian cultural horde? I don't know. No biggie, but it sounds not nice in a way that feels at least semi-intentional.
In today's video, I'm going to react to one of these kind of deconstructionist Christians and respond to a video that I think is pretty common, like the accusations that she's sharing are pretty common.
Accusations? Alright. I guess let's see if she makes actual accusations or if this is, just how he describes her sharing her perspective.
Maybe you have heard these in your own life for people that are deconstructing, or maybe you've had these questions yourself. Regardless, let's dive into it.
Yeah, a big contributing factor to why I stopped wanting to worship the biblical God is because I did not like the idea of him torturing or even annihilating those that I loved and cared about that simply didn't believe in him. I had plenty of non-Christian friends that I considered to be genuinely good people. But because they didn't believe in God, I had to believe that they were evil and that they were going to be justly tortured for all of eternity.
Okay, let's talk about this because there's lots of misconceptions about hell out there.
How does he know that what she or anybody else is saying about hell is a misconception? Has he been there? Observed it in any way? Verified anything about it through any means other than accepting verbal or written assertions about it? If not, he has no reasonable way of saying she's misunderstanding it. The worst she's doing is guessing about it, like he is, or much more likely speaking in hypothetical terms about the idea of it she learned to process her time in the faith. The fact is, no Christian knows anything at all about hell or who's going there, so don't let them come at you telling you you're ignorant of something that's at best indistinguishable from a made-up concept.
And it sounds like she has some, even while she was, she considered herself to be a Christian.
Considered herself to be a Christian. Nice catch. You almost did her the basic respect of acknowledging her status as a former believer.
She had some misconceptions about it as well. She says that she understood her friends to be pretty much good people, right? And so why would they go to hell? Well, it actually gets to the core foundation of like who we are as people. Are we intrinsically good? Or are we intrinsically evil?
He's going to say we're all so sinful we deserve hell, isn't he? Though you're all probably 8 seconds ahead of me at seeing that coming.
According to the Bible, if we're going to go with the Bible here, if we're going to call ourselves a Christian, then we got to go with what the Word of God says. And we say, okay, well, the Bible says that we've all fallen short of the glory of God, that we're all dead in our trespasses and sins. And you might even look at that and say, okay, well, I can understand that we've sinned. And so there might be some punishment that is due, but really like hell for all of eternity, that's pretty extreme. A lot of people have that perspective.
Yeah, because it makes sense.
And so this analogy might give you some help on this. So, if I were to lie to my little brother, nothing would happen really. Like, he's my little brother. I can lie to him and like it's bad, I did a bad thing, but like ultimately the consequences of that aren't going to be that extreme.
Depends a lot on what you lied about. But let's circle back to that after giving him a little more rope to work with.
If I lied to my parent, let's say I was a little bit younger and I was still like a teenager and I lied to my parent, the consequences of that would be more severe. I might get grounded or some of my privileges might be taken away. If I were to lie to a cop, a police officer, man, the consequences of that scenario would definitely be heightened quite a bit more. If I were to lie to a judge, that would be perjury and I would be sent to jail. So the lie didn't change. It was a lie each time, but who I committed the act against did change. So when you commit an act against God, who is completely holy, infinitely holy, right? Something super small to us might seem insignificant. To God, it is an infinite offense, and thus the punishment is eternity in hell.
You all see anything wrong with this reasoning? Give me a minute to ponder it. And while I do, why don't you write your objections in the comments? I'm still drawing a blank. And since I unfortunately can't read all the amazingly helpful things I'm sure you're writing in the comments, because you're doing it in the future, how about if I list all the examples he gave to see if it helps me organize my thoughts? He talked about lying to, first, his little brother, which apparently is just not that big a deal, then his parents, which I guess is a slightly bigger deal so he'd get grounded, third, a police officer, which is extra worse because you'd have unnamed consequences that are heightened quite a bit, great precision we're working with here, fourth, a judge, which is so bad you get sent to jail. So he's giving us a list of people he might lie to, and in each case the punishment gets worse. Why? Because of who he committed the act to. Meaning, I think, that lying is worse the, higher the person is you're lying to. Therefore, if the punishments get more severe for doing the same thing to each of these people, it's only logical to assume that if you do something against God who's infinitely holy, then you deserve infinite punishment. Wait, now I see a few things wrong with this, now that I've laid it all out there and also because I was just sarcastically pretending to be confused. For one, notice that he never even tells us what distinguishes his brother from his parents, from a police officer, from a judge. Seriously, go back and watch again. It's just assumed that each one is a step above the previous one in a hierarchy of authority or something. Then after piling them all on top of each other by insinuation, he makes God the final step in this hierarchy, which he suddenly says is defined by holiness. But this makes no sense because by no stretch of the imagination could holiness be the undefined criteria he'd been using to sort all these people. I mean, is your little brother less holy than your parents? Is he just way less holy than a judge? Now this is just silly, of course, and it seems like the kind of thing we could mostly ignore and move on. But there's a little trick here that it's important to be aware of, because it can slip into a lot of conversations and give believers room to justify weird ideas like this. And that is that his hierarchy feels intuitive to us because of how we instinctively view authority. Childhood training and primate instinct have ingrained in our psyche such deep-seated feelings of obligation to people in charge, and shame at the idea of wronging them, that Isaac didn't even have to tell us what was different about people on this list. We not only factually knew each person had a different role in society, but felt that someone would be in more trouble for wronging each higher one in the sequence. This feeling might not be equally present for all of us, but deep down it's there. Isaac's way of presenting this list misleadingly connects the greater consequences of lying in different situations to the shame we'd feel for being in trouble with an authority figure, which prompts a childlike feeling that the whole reason an action is bad is that it's an affront to that authority figure. So of course the more status an authority figure has, the worse it is to do something bad to them and the more punishment you deserve. It's really remarkably stupid, even before the unspoken status of each person is suddenly identified as holiness the moment we talk about God, and the deserved consequences become infinite because his status is infinitely high. But it's the kind of thing apologetics can get away with when conversation skims the shallow waters of uninsightful instinct. Of course, the greater reaction to lying in each example is not because of the person you're lying to, but because of the consequences of lying in a specific situation. Lying to your little brother seems comparatively innocuous, but that implies a relatively innocent lie that doesn't cause a lot of harm. A more serious one, say telling him a loaded weapon was a toy or that prescription medication was candy, could get a person in a lot of trouble regardless of how low he is on this list. Because, that has absolutely nothing to do with why things are wrong. Same with lying to a judge. You don't get in trouble because it's an affront to the judge as a person. It's because perjury disrupts the legal system and could possibly get an innocent person sent to prison. In fact, you could lie to an off-duty judge or police officer all day long depending on the circumstances, because who you're lying to has nothing to do with anything. Hashtag not legal advice. Now yeah, God is understood by Christians as never off-duty, I guess. But that's not the point. The point is that any form of this, God is infinite and thus any action done against him deserves infinite punishment, is not only nonsensical, but based on a kindergarten-level understanding of what an authority figure is and why you respond to one the way you do. In fact, it basically gets the whole idea backwards since, when someone's not acting in an official role on behalf of society, you usually get in more trouble for wronging someone younger or more vulnerable. And there's often going to be more leniency for someone the weaker or less able they are compared to the person they're wronging. If a 3-year-old ran up and punched me, I wouldn't call the police. I'd be pretty well able to cope with and be understanding about the situation, hoping I or the parents could try to calm the kid and help them understand better behavior. In the same way, God should be totally unaffected by anything I did to him and have the ability to cope with the fact that a puny human, more childish by comparison to him than a 3-year-old is to me, wronged him. He should be able to see all sides of why I did what I did and come up with a solution more elegant than eternal torment for helping me grow from the experience. I should no sooner be punished worse for my actions because of how his status compares to mine than a 3-year-old should get a longer prison sentence because of how my status compares to theirs. So I just said a lot, but that was his entire basis for why we deserve hell.
She says how she didn't want to see them as evil and deserving of hell. Well, we need to understand that we are not above them, right? Like, it's not like we're as Christians saying, oh, they're so evil and why are they so bad and why am, I'm so good and I'm going to heaven because I'm a nice guy. It's like, that's not a biblical or Christian perspective. It's that we have all sinned and all fallen short of the glory of God.
So what? I don't think her objection was to the idea that her friends were that much worse than her. The problem is that anybody could be that bad at all. Yet Isaac answers by saying that we all fall short, as if everybody deserving to be tortured for eternity makes more sense than some people deserving to be tortured for eternity. Sure, I guess it sounds nice on an incredibly superficial level to say, well, I'm not better than you, I'm just saved by grace, but that doesn't resolve the issue or even have anything to do with it.
And it is only by God's grace that I'm saved, right? It's like I'm a beggar that's looking for bread and I found that bread. And now we're called as Christians to share that good news.
Yeah, great analogy. It would totally fit the situation if God made you a hungry beggar, created the bread somewhere where you couldn't find it, and left it up to chance and someone else's willingness to tell you about it to determine whether you starve. So I guess when I say great analogy, I mean great at showing what a dumb idea this is.
It's not like God has hung us out to dry here. He's given us a path out of this judgment that we rightfully deserve through Jesus' sacrifice. That's the whole point of the gospel. That's the whole point of Christianity.
So he says God's given us a path out of the judgment that we deserve, but, do we deserve eternal torment? That stupid thing about offenses against God being infinite isn't nearly enough to start treating such an insanely horrible idea as a given. Unless, of course, you're only hoping to smooth things over with people who already take it as a given themselves. The very idea of torturing someone forever just because it's what they deserve, especially if all they did to deserve it was live a normal human life, is one of those things that's so evidently wrong that even most of the faithful can only tolerate it in barely considered abstract terms. What's more, we really need to look at this whole idea of people deserving things to begin with. What does that even mean? What's it worth to retaliate against someone because they deserve it? The whole point of a consequence should be to deter people from bad behavior or reform them so they're less likely to engage in it later. Doing something bad to someone just because they did something bad themselves achieves literally nothing. It just fulfills our instinctive sense of comeuppance. It's the most superficial, and though I keep using this word childish, reaction to undesirable behavior, and the fact that the Bible automatically resorts to it and Isaac appeals to it says something about the shallow philosophical waters they're wading in. Hell is nothing more than retaliation. It accomplishes nothing except inflicting pain on people, endlessly, forever and ever and ever and ever, with no restorative or corrective outcome. And it's almost always inflicted on people who had no fair warning that it was coming, either because they never heard about the Christian idea of hell or very reasonably thought it sounded implausible. So it really doesn't inform or deter people. It's just kind of revenge for not believing in a God's religion. So the assumption that we deserve it just glosses over a lot of problematic nonsense, only the most obvious of which is the grotesque severity of the punishment. Simply taking that as a given and rattling off a description of the silly Rube Goldberg mechanism God uses to help a few people get around this problem explains literally nothing of substance.
And when you're young, you just accept this. But as you get older and you start grappling with your own morality, you start to wonder how this is just. And
grappling with your own morality.
Look at the way he suddenly jumps in all enthusiastically with a shit-eating grin, as if the subjectiveness of your own morality is some gotcha he's going to nail her with. Because, we all know that's coming.
Listen how she puts that. Yes, you either are stuck with God's objective morality or you're subjected with your own morality. What's the alternative here? Well, am I the judge of God? Like I'm going to judge God for the way that he conducts himself because it doesn't fit in my morality? Look, where am I getting morality from if I'm just like stardust bumping into stardust? If I'm just, an evolved animal and I have no intrinsic dignity or worth.
Alright, while we give Mr. Humans Have No Intrinsic Worth a minute to cool down, let's establish a couple baseline assumptions. You exist, and so do the people around you. Unless you want to entertain some kind of brain in the vat idea, this is a pretty safe starting point for conversation, right? We're here, and whatever makes up the humanity that we value and concern ourselves with is swirling around somewhere inside our heads. So if someone gets hurt, you feel bad for them, because if you're a healthy, empathetic person, you value them. And you value them because of who they are now. They're equally here and equally human, regardless of whether they came from a god or emerged from purely natural processes. To diminish the humanity of someone who inarguably exists at this moment because of the mechanism that got them there is just weird and shows a sociopathic lack of concern for their experience. Now, I'm not saying Isaac's a sociopath. It's more likely he hasn't thought a lot about why we value each other as humans, so saying we're automatically imbued with value through what amounts to magic is just kind of an easy shortcut. But even if we're spiritual beings created by God, we'd still need to build that same understanding of why we should value each other, or even God for that matter. I really don't want to belabor this any further here. I've already done an entire dumb things people say to atheists video about it, so you can watch that if you want. The long and the short of it is, not valuing someone because they're just a bunch of stardust is as dumb as not valuing a house because it's just a bunch of wood. In either case, you're just describing something in terms of its base components to pretend it's not what it is, which is silly.
Where am I getting that standard of right and wrong and morality if I'm denying God's standard?
Asking for your standard for morality is reducing the conversation to its most basic childhood questions of who's in charge and why should I listen to them. A much better conversation would be about the goal for morality. In this case, we're looking at two possibilities. One is increasing human flourishing, or at least making sure we don't cause unnecessary harm to each other. And the other is ensuring a being you've labeled as God gets obeyed. To me, the first is a much better goal, and most people would agree with me, including Christians who usually try to construe the Bible so that God's rules for behavior align with it. Because when these two conflict, they're faced with an uncomfortable question about why God, who they want to see as the standard for morality, would do things that horribly conflict with our more deeply internalized fundamental goal for morality. The question of why God sends people to hell is the ultimate expression of this discomfort, asking why his standard would call for gratuitous, pointless harm that carries on for eternity. So when Isaac suggests we just go by God's standard no matter what, he's just flatly ignoring the actual question at play.
See, if we're going to cling to the 10 Commandments or, what Jesus said is like, oh, good moral teaching, then we need to embrace all of it.
Like the parts about owning slaves or women submitting to their husbands or... Oh, he probably doesn't mean all of it.
And when God says, you know what, you're guilty before me and you're deserving of this, then we got to take him at his word, regardless of if it doesn't fit into our morality.
See, but this is actually the core problem. If someone shows you a book that sometimes teaches things you generally recognize as good, but then suddenly you run into parts where it says, everybody who doesn't make a specific profession of faith of the right religion should be tortured forever, you're going to suddenly question whether this book makes sense. You're not questioning God. You're not failing to take him at his word. You're questioning whether the book you've been shown as much as expresses any kind of coherent, intelligent view on morality, much less likely came from a God. And for pretty darn good reason. Simply saying you have to accept it all and you're questioning God if you don't isn't even arguing anything. It's just forceful insistence that you accept what they say regardless of how much sense it makes.
Because our morality is flawed. It changes every day. Look at the world's morality and how it shifted over time. It's flawed.
Sure, it shifts. That's a good sign of growing and learning. When it shifts for the better, great. If you see it shift for the worse, you should push back. When it just parks on an ancient teaching that people should be tormented for not agreeing with the right religion, you shouldn't give its horrendous ideas a pass just because it's decisive about it.
We say you come to a crossroad where you have to either choose your belief or choose your empathy. You have to get...
Choose your belief or choose your empathy. That's such an interesting way to put it. Because look, it's not about... you can feel bad for people that are not Christians and they're going to go to hell, right? And that's a scary thought. That's oh man, I don't want that, right? Because you want them to be saved. You want them to come to know Jesus.
Yes. In theory, given these beliefs, you'd want to do everything in your power to make sure this didn't happen. But the fact that God's apparently less interested in this goal than you are, indeed created hell and the rules for getting there, puts him at odds with you in this regard. And the fact that Christianity expects you to admire him while being concerned for the people he's condemning is part of the problem. Again, Isaac's missing the entire point by telling you how empathy should lead you to act within the assumptions of Christianity instead of recognizing how it might make you question those assumptions.
And you can have that feeling, but the way you deal with that is not, oh, you know what? Like, maybe they're not going to go to hell. Maybe they're cool. Like, they're pretty good people.
Maybe torturing pretty cool people is weird and doesn't make sense.
Like, okay, I'm not even going to worry about it anymore.
Like, okay, because I don't worry about things that seem like nonsense.
And that makes me feel better. And, I can feel like empathy towards them. So I don't, I want to just like let it go and let the truth go.
Or, and here's the actual point, question whether that makes enough sense to even be considered truth.
No, it's like, well, no, we got to pursue truth regardless of how it makes us feel.
And insisting something is true by simply reiterating its dictates in the face of questions isn't a good way to pursue truth.
So it's not about choosing your belief or choosing empathy. It's about choosing truth or choosing to make ourselves feel better by denying what is true.
Give one up for the other. And I just could not give up my empathy to maintain my belief that my friends that didn't believe deserved eternal punishment. And it hurts that my own family would worship and praise a God that they believe will do the same to me.
Ultimately, it's God who needs to transform this woman's heart.
Not to be condescending or anything.
To surrender her own perspective and her own morality to God. Because right now she is judging God. She's placed herself as the judge of God, saying, look, God, I don't think your justice is truly just. I don't think your goodness is truly good. I don't think your love is truly loving. I think my definitions of what love and truth and justice are more valid.
No, she's not judging God. She's asking healthy questions about whether what people tell her about God makes sense. Until you get stuff like that, everything she says is going to continue flying way over your head.
And so she's putting herself on this kind of high horse.
Unlike you, who's not putting yourself on a high horse by saying every assertion you're making literally comes from God.
Of saying, I need to embody this empathy for all these people, and I can't, coexist with this belief that God would send people to hell because that's just so unempathetic and that kind of thing. Well, hey, look, if that's the truth, is that the truth? That's the real question.
Yes, it's the real question. So it's kind of unconstructive when you fail to recognize the real questions in what she's saying and just come at her with the very assumptions she's questioning.
It might make us feel uncomfortable. It may make us feel sad that people are going to hell. But what does that drive us to? Does it drive us into denial and accusing God of not being good? Or does it drive us into action and actually living out his commands on this earth to be a witness for him?
See, if you actually saw some mechanism sending people to a place of eternal torment, then yes, your discomfort with the idea should drive you to stop them from going there. But when people just say they'll go there for not practicing the right religion, then it's healthy and normal to question them, especially considering the idea doesn't align with any aspect of reality you've observed, and extra especially when you start to notice reasons the teaching might not make sense. Simply telling people they reject the idea because it makes them feel bad is condescending. Coming at them reiterating tenets of the religion they're doubting just shows you're either not capable of or not interested in getting your head around the questions they're asking. Either way, you've disqualified yourself from even a simple conversation in a way that's as obnoxious and offensive as if someone from a different religion did the same to you. If you want open conversation with non-believers, then maybe stop shutting that door and see what happens. This program was made possible by a grant from John Adams, Bob Generic, Maggie Danger, S.R. Foxley, Daniel Bostedt, Magnus Holmgren, Arisma Zaramp, and Q, and by the generous support of viewers like you. If you'd like to join them in pledging to this channel, please find a link to the Prophet of Zod Patreon below.